Hello friends, today I am going to discuss about a new concept of consumer behavior, that is decomposition of price effect into income and substitution effect. So before going to decompose this price effect into income and substitution effect, first we have to know about the price effect. So what is price effect? When price of a commodity changes, it leads to change the quantity demanded. So the change in quantity demanded due to the change in price of the commodity is called price effect. But here it should be noted that a change in price of a commodity not directly leads to change the quantity demanded. One second, I want to make sure that the change in price of a commodity doesn't lead to change in quantity demanded directly, rather by two ways. So what are the two ways? The first one is the substitution effect, and the second one is the real income effect, or we can say income effect. So a change in price affects the change in quantity demanded through two effects. The first one is the substitution effect, and the second one is the real income effect, or we can say the income effect. So let us know about the substitution effect and the income effect in detail. Okay, so what is income effect? A fall in price increases the real purchasing power of consumer. That is called income effect or real income effect. That means when the price of the commodity falls, it leads to increase the purchasing power of the consumer. And that increased purchasing power is the real income, is the real income effect. For example, suppose when the price of apple per kg was 10 rupees, by spending 100 rupees, a consumer could purchase 10 units of apple or 10 kg of apple. But when the price declines from 10 rupees to 5 rupees, by spending 100 rupees, the consumer could purchase 20 units or 20 kg of apple. Why? There is no change in the consumer's nominal income, but still the consumer is able to purchase 20 kg of apple instead of 10 kg of apple. Now the consumer is purchasing 10 kg more apple, and that 10 kg more apple is purchased because of the increase in real income. Okay, so let's see what is substitution effect. When a commodity's price will decline, that commodity will become a relatively cheaper commodity to com- compare to the substitute commodity. For example, let's suppose we are talking about apple and orange. Let apple is a substitute of orange. Suppose the price of apple declines, whereas the price of orange remain constant. So if the price of apple will decline, now apple will be a relatively cheaper commodity in comparison to orange, in comparison to its substitute commodity. So people would like to substitute more of the cheaper commodity to the dearer one, and that is substitution effect. So this is the difference between income and substitution effect. Now we'll see how the price effect can be decomposed into income and substitution effect. It can be decomposed into income and substitution effect by using two methods. One is Hicksian method and the second one is Slutsky method. So Hicksian method is developed by Hicks and the Slutsky method is developed by Professor Slutsky. So what are the two methods? First, we'll discuss about Hicksian method of decomposition of price effect into income and substitution effect. So this diagram represents Hicks' approach of decomposition of price effect into income and substitution effect. In this diagram, we have measured good X in the horizontal axis and good Y in the vertical axis. Let's suppose the prices of the commodities good X and good Y and income of the consumer is that it produces a budget line called AB1. This AB1 budget line tangent to the indifference curve IC1 at point E1. So E1 is the initial consumer's equilibrium point. Here, the consumer is able to purchase OX1 of good X. And how much of good Y? E1 X1 of good Y. Okay. Let's suppose there is a decline in the price of good X. So the decrease in price of good X leads to change the budget line in such a way the budget line shifted from AB1 to AB2. So AB2 is now the new budget line after the change in price of good X. And this new budget line AB2 is tangent to the indifference curve IC2 at point E3. So now the new equilibrium point of consumer is E3, where the consumer is able to purchase OX2 of good X and E3 X2 of good Y. Okay, so now you will see that the movement from E1 to E3. So the movement from E1 to E3 is due to the price effect. Okay, so the movement from E1 to E3 is due to price effect because the consumer moves from E1 to E3 commodity bundle because of a change in a reduction in the price of good X. So X1, X2 is the price effect because due to the reduction of price of X, the consumer is able to purchase this extra unit, X1, X2, extra unit of good X. So this is price effect. Now, we derive the price effect. Now the next duty is to find out the substitution effect and income effect. So Hicks suggested that it is a little bit difficult to find out the substitution effect directly, but it is quite easy to find out the income effect. How? To measure the income effect, Hicks suggested a method. Hicks suggested that we have to withdraw some amount of money from the total income of the consumer in such a way that the consumer will get back to the original indifference cost. Once again, I want to make sure that to measure the income effect, Professor Hicks suggested that we have to withdraw some amount of money from the total income of the consumer in such a way that the consumer will get back to the original indifference cost. Now the question is how? How we will be able to withdraw some amount of money from the total income of the consumer? And the answer is by the way of taxation. By imposing tax, the government will impose tax to withdraw some amount of money from the total income of the consumer, so that the consumer new budget line will be A3B3. So due to the reduction of money by the way of taxation, now the consumer's budget line shifted from AB2 to A3B3. So the new budget line is now A3B3 due to reduction of income. And this new budget line A3B3 is tangent to the initial indifference curve IC1 at point E2. So now E2 is the new equilibrium point after the reduction of income, where the consumer is able to purchase OX3 of good X and E2X3 of good Y. Now we will see the movement from E3 to E2. So the movement from E3 to E2 is due to the income effect. Why the consumer moves from E3 to E2? Because of the change in income. So the movement from E3 to E2 is called income effect. And X3, X2 is the income effect, because at E3 the consumer was able to purchase OX2 of good X, but now at point E2 he is able to purchase OX3 of good X. Now the consumption of good X is declined by X3, X2, and this is called the income effect. This is due to the income effect. So we already derived the income effect and we have the price effect. Both price effect and income effect is derived, and the substitution effect can be derived by reducing the income effect from the price effect. So x1 x2 minus x3 x2 is equal to x1 x3, and this x1 x3 is the substitution effect, that is price effect minus income effect is equal to substitution effect. So here the substitution effect is x1 x3. That means the movement from E1 to E2 is the substitution effect. So this is all about the decomposition of price effect into income and substitution effect by Professor Hicks. Now we will discuss about the decomposition of price effect into income and substitution effect by Professor Slutsky, using Slutsky. Here also in the x-axis we have measured good x, and in the y-axis or in the vertical axis we have measured good y. Let's suppose the prices of two goods and the income of the consumer is such that it produces a budget line AB1. So AB1 is the original budget line or the initial budget line, and this budget line tangent to the indifference curve IC1 at point E1. So E1 is the initial equilibrium point where the consumer is able to purchase OX1 of good X and E1X1 of good Y. But suppose the price of good Y remain constant. If the price of good X declines, then the budget line will take a new form. The budget line will shift from AB1 to AB2. So now the new budget line due to the change in price of X is AB2, and this AB2 new budget line tangent to the indifference curve IC3 at point E2. So E2 is now the new equilibrium point where the consumer is able to purchase OX2 of good X and E2X2 of good Y. So the movement from E1 to E2 is the price effect, because the consumer moves from E1 to E2 due to a change in price of X. So this is price effect. And here the consumer is able to purchase some extra unit of good X, that is X1, X2 of good X more due to the price effect. So X1, X2 is the price effect. And Slutsky suggested that if the price effect is given and any effect, income effect or substitution effect is given, then it will be easy to derive the other effect. And he suggested that it is little bit difficult to derive the substitution effect, but it is quite easy to derive the income effect. So in order to derive the income effect, Slutsky suggested a method. He suggested that we have to withdraw some amount of money from the total income of the consumer in such a way that the consumer will not only get back to the original indifference curve but also to the original equilibrium point. Once again, I want to make sure that Slutsky suggested to withdraw some amount of money from the total income of the consumer in such a way that the consumer not only get back to the original indifference curve but also to the original equilibrium point. So after the reduction of money from the total income of the consumer. Now the consumer budget line, the new budget line is shifted from AB2 to A4 B4 because of the reduction of money income. The consumer moves from AB2 budget line to A4 B4 budget line. And now this new budget line A4 B4 is tangent to the indifference curve IC2 at point E3. So E3 is now the new consumer's equilibrium point where the consumer is purchasing OX3 of good X and E3 X3 of good Y. At point E2, the consumer was purchasing OX2 of good X, but at point E3, the consumer is purchasing OX3 of good X. So there is a reduction of the consumption of good X by X3, X2, and this reduction of good X is due to the change in income. So this is called income effect. The movement from E2 to E3 is called income effect. So X3, X2 is the income effect. And we already derived the price effect as X1, X2. So if X1, X2 is the price effect and X3, X2 is the income effect, then we can easily find out the substitution effect. That is, substitution effect is equal to the price effect minus the income effect. So the price effect X1, X2 minus the income effect X3, X2 is equal to the substitution effect X1, X3. So this is the derivation of substitution effect by Slutsky. Here it should be noted that we are saying that Slutsky suggested the withdrawal of money from the total income of the consumer in such a way the consumer will not only get back to the original indifference curve but also to the original equilibrium point. So after the withdrawal of money income, the consumer moves from E2 to E3. But E3 is not the original equilibrium point. Neither IC2 is the original indifference curve or the equilibrium point E3 is the original equilibrium point. So how Slutsky's suggestion is satisfied? Slutsky's suggestion is fulfilled. How? Yes. Though E3 is not the original equilibrium point or IC2 is not the original or the initial indifference curve, still the consumer can move from E3 to E1, from IC2 to IC1. Why? Why the consumer can move from E3 to E1, from E3 to E1? How? Because both points E1 and E3 are lying on the same budget line A4, B4. So as both equilibrium points are lying on the same budget line A4, B4, the consumer can easily move from E3 to E1. So if the consumer moves to E1, then this E1 is lying on the indifference curve IC1. So easily, due to the reduction of income, the consumer moves from E2, that is from IC3 to E1, which is lying on IC1. So Slutsky's suggestion is satisfied that after the reduction of money from the total income of the consumer, the consumer will get back not only to the original indifference curve but also to the original equilibrium point. So here IC1 is the original or the initial indifference curve and E1 is the initial equilibrium point. So this is all about the decomposition of price effect into income and substitution effect, which was proposed by Hicks and Slutsky.